When language is subverted and made meaningless, everything is lost and anything goes. That results in a new thing indeed. History is truncated, memory is eradicated, stories are erased and are remade in a current distortion. The reason ceases to function, conventional cliches pass for truth, discussion is prohibited or becomes pointless, and results in shouting or name calling. This reconstruction will continue until we give up religion, the ideals of manliness and honor, and exchange evil for good and bitter for sweet. Our enemies have found we cannot be exterminated, so now the first thing to be done is to destroy our system of education in their utilitarian, money oriented system. That was classicist Basil Gildersleeve talking about Reconstruction, because once you lose the war, what do you think happens? It was martial law, occupation of Union troops in all of the southern states. And these states all saw themselves as sovereign. You didn't call yourself an American back in that time. You were a Virginian or a Georgian. So when it was an invasion from the north, and they didn't just come down and free everybody and say, okay, y'all be good, we're out. No, it created this huge humanitarian crisis. All of these, they called them contraband camps, because the north viewed the free people as now property of the north since they were property of the south. That's seriously how they viewed it. Some of the newly freed people were able to do very well, as I'll show a couple examples, but it seems like for the vast majority, it was you were newly freed to go, be homeless and starving and go to refugee camps, just like what happened over in Iraq. I mean, we went and freed the crap out of those people, blew everything up, destroyed all their infrastructure, and now they got to start over from scratch. Same thing. And then everybody already knows they're going to install a banana republic that is loyal to the crown or the gown. There were quite a few Southern senators that had rebelled against the U.S. government and tried to secede, and had to basically go crawling back with their tails between their legs, begging for forgiveness. That must have been fun. But this political cartoon basically sums things up. You've got the northern banker. All he's worried about is the capital right there. You've got up in the north the immigrants getting a vote now, immigrant suffrage, and I'm going to start calling them noobs due to this being a political issue. If I say that too many times, I'll get flagged on this video. And then you have the Southern soldier, the Confederate Southern Army belt. For some reason on his knife it says the Lost Caves, if I'm reading that right, so I don't know what is going on with that. But all of this really does show the true attitude towards the newly freed slaves. That was not the issue. It was politics and money, just like always. And it was truly an afterthought what to do with the newly freed people. They literally walked into, not everybody lived on plantations, but they walked into households, said, you have to get out now, you're free. Now, this is a subject that's hard to get any really good information on, because everything is so politically motivated, and every subject turns into a civil rights conversation. And I want to point out very clearly that until the 1960 civil rights movement, it was never even taught anywhere that the purpose of the Civil War was to free the slaves. Never. But I dug all through this, and it is painfully obvious to see what actually caused the Civil War. And I'm not joking. I got a straight up answer of why things went down. But first, I got to tell you this story about what this political cartoon reminded me of. So right here, they're basically rubbing it in the South's face that they're going to elect Grant to be president, and there's nothing they can do about it. And this is actually what started the war in the first place, was the powerless South in the voting process. Grant was a Civil War hero, and so they wanted him to basically eradicate all the Native Americans that were left west of the Mississippi. So they elected a wartime hero. The South hated Grant, so of course they want anybody that can beat Grant. And right there they say, what are you going to do about it? they know that the southern states had already lost all their power before the Civil War. Now they've got even less, and they're rubbing it in their faces. And this reminded me of this famous historical story of when the Visigoths sacked Rome. So they sack the city, and the Romans give up. They say, okay, we'll pay your demands if you'll stop killing all of us. So they say, okay, 1,000 pounds of gold. They agree to these terms, they lay down their arms, and they go to settle up. Well, the Visigoths brought rigged weights along, and so they were heavier. And the Romans finally caught on to it that they were using rigged weights, getting a lot more than 1,000 pounds of gold. So they go to complain to Brinius, I think his name was, the Visigoth leader, saying, "Hey, you're using rigged weights." And he takes out his sword, he throws it on the weighted side of things, adding more weight to the gold that they're going to have to pay him. And he says, "Vae victis," which somehow translates to "woe unto the vanquished." As in, what are you going to do about it? We just conquered you. You're paying up. So what are you going to do? This was the basic attitude of the North towards the South. You guys lost. We destroyed all your cities. You guys don't have any money. Y'all ain't got no infrastructure. And you don't have any more political clout. So we're calling the shots. So let me tell you what actually started this war. We should know by now that history is being told by Darth Vader's perspective. The Empire has already won. All right, the rebellion failed. So the most popular presidents in history are the biggest Manchurian candidate puppets. You can add Abe Lincoln to that list now, right along with FDR and the New Deal and all the big government spending, because historians look at America as two different Americas completely: Jeffersonian America and Lincolnian America. Jeffersonian America is named after Thomas Jefferson, of course, and the Jeffersonian Revolution of the 1800s, because Federalists were already trying to give more control to the federal government than there should be. And so by 1800, Thomas Jefferson gets elected, and his style of government is what the South actually lived by, where states have the power and limited monies allocated to the federal government whatsoever. So the actual free America ended during the Civil War, and we got Lincolnian America, which is big money, big spending. Post-Civil War tariffs, 45%. I mean, they're taking half of your money for doing business with anybody overseas. In 1869, the Florida government spent more on printing alone than the entire state budget of 1860. The Louisiana legislation averaged spending about $100,000 a year prior to Reconstruction. After Reconstruction, $1 million a year. So their annual budget went up tenfold. Also, the North had a professional army standing and paid for by the U.S. government, while the South were just sovereign citizens trying to fight for their freedom. So you literally had ads in the paper for cannons. You could buy cannons. And in one of my previous videos, I showed how one slave gave his master enough money to actually purchase a cannon with. Now, in this paper, they also talk about one of the issues that was truly instigating the reason for the war was in the North, they had as many factories as the South had factory workers. They say there were about 100,000 factory workers in the South, while there were 100,000 factories in the North. We'll get more into that in a minute with the real immigration story. But they had monopolized the trade in gunny cloth, which I think they were using to basically sack their cotton in for export and everything. But right here, they basically say, look, we don't need those guys up there. We can do everything ourselves down here. We're going to secede, and we will deal with other countries directly and not have to pay, I think they were paying 16%, it's in here somewhere, through tariffs for dealing with Boston. So the people of the South were feeling screwed over on the money side of things, and then they completely felt screwed over in the 1860 election when Abraham Lincoln won, because he wasn't even on the ballot for 10 of the southern states. You guys smelling a little JoJo action here? Most popular prez ever, huh? So here's your real story of what the noobs have done for this country. You know, the people coming over, the noobs. We've heard all about how they built America. Yeah, they came over and they worked for the rich people and barely eked out a living. Like Jane Addams says, an unscrupulous contractor regards no basement as too dark, no stable loft too foul, no rear shanty too provisional, no tenant room too small for his workmen, and these conditions imply low rental. They were importing as many slave wage laborers as they possibly could into the North, gaining political power the whole time. So by 1860, you can see New York and Pennsylvania had 27 and 35 electoral votes between the two of them, which is more than enough to outvote all of the southern states. You guys starting to smell a little taxation without representation? So Lincoln was not even on the ballot in all of the southern states, and it just proved to them that they had just been suckered. They had no political power whatsoever anymore due to all of the noobs that the North had brought in, and later spawned the Cornelius Vanderbilts and John D. Rockefellers that were these megalomaniacs that were as powerful as the US government at the time. And New York was the real capital of America because of all the money there. So between 1820 and 1860, 5.5 million immigrants, about 3.7 went to New York, and about 500,000 to New Orleans, the only southern state, the rest to other northern states. So they gained huge political power, just exactly like they're doing right now. Just so you know, there's been 1 million noobs detained at our southern border this year alone. There are 7 states that have a total population of less than 1 million people. So there have been 1 million people trying to enter this year alone. That is more than the population of 7 states. So I hope you guys see that this is the exact same takeover as was happening back then, and it's the same play for political power. But most people in the South, especially Jeffersonian American, was totally against the import of all these new people. And after the Civil War, then the floodgates opened. 12 million between 1870 and 1900. So twice as many people came in the 30 years after the Civil War. Anyway, needless to say, Southerners were pissed, and so there were several assassination attempts on Lincoln on his way to his inauguration. The Baltimore plot, the U.S. government, whoever was paying for things at that time, had to pay the Pinkerton Detective Agency to be security for the president because people were not playing around back then. And I'm sure that the Pinkerton Detective Agency definitely played a part in the foundation of our FBI and CIA and all of that. And just so you guys know how things really operated back in the day, look who's actually paying for the arrest, dead or alive, of these people. Union Pacific, the railroad, is putting out a death warrant on people. So that goes to show you who the sheriff was really working for back in the day. In Lincoln's inaugural address, he says this: apprehension seems to exist among the people of the southern states that by accession of a Republican administration, their property and their peace and personal security are to be endangered. Now, he goes on to keep talking about slavery here, but I want to point something out with how spin works right now exactly with the big V they want everybody to get. You notice how they don't talk about anybody ever getting sick from it. They always just have their talking points. They keep the direction of, it doesn't matter if it's reality or not. The news will just keep repeating. And that's kind of what it sounds like is going on here. They're ignoring the fact that 10 of the southern states didn't even have this guy on the ballot. And then he got elected. And they all realized, well, hey, this is a BS deal. We joined a union of states for the protection of freedoms in this country, and now you guys are taking those freedoms away, and we don't have a say in it whatsoever. all 10 of our states don't add up to the same amount of votes as New York and Philadelphia. So that is completely ignored in the inaugural address. But he does bring up his side of the argument on the idea of secession and says, again, if the United States were not a government proper, but an association of states in the nature of a contract merely, can it, as a contract, be peaceably unmade by less than all parties who made it? One party to a contract may violate it, break it, so to speak, but does it not require all to lawfully rescind it? So he is saying that no, you guys don't have the right to walk away because we made a deal that we are the United States of America. This is a contract between us, and you can't just break the contract on your side alone. He continues, quote, "It follows from these views that no state upon its own mere notion can lawfully get out of the Union, that resolves and ordinances to that effect are legally void, and that acts of violence within any state or states against the authority of the United States are insurrectionary or revolutionary according to the circumstances. In doing this, there needs to be no bloodshed or violence, and there shall be none unless it be forced upon the national authority." On the subject of bloodshed, just for the record, the first battle of the Civil War was the Union that refused to leave Fort Sumter in South Carolina. So the Confederates launched an attack, and wouldn't you know it, they didn't kill a single Union soldier. Do you think that was by accident, or do you think they were not trying to actually kill anyone? They were just firing on the fort, insisting that they leave. So the real bloodshed did not start until the Union invaded the South at the Battle of Second Manassas, and the Confederates won and fought them back then. But this truly is the story of the end of what we are taught that we live under as constitutional law, Jeffersonian America. No, it's all changed around to the big government, Lincolnian America. I think I'm just going to stop right there on this one, and at some point we'll do a video about the Reconstruction period of Union occupation of the southern states and people like Jesse James. Jesse James was a folk hero because everybody hated the Union. And why wouldn't they just found out that they had been sold down the river by their own fellow countrymen, supposedly. Anyway, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Static out.